segment here to here, and my midpoint is the exact middle. I know the coordinates of this point and I know the coordinates of this point. I want to know what is my midpoint. Where would my midpoint fall in that line? This formula lets me find those coordinates. So what I do is, this is x1 and y1, x2 and y2. So each pair has an x and y, so xy, xy. And it doesn't matter which one is 1 and which one is 2, I just usually go in order. So the midpoint is going to equal x1 plus x2 divided by 2, comma, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So that's 6 divided by 2 and 20 divided by 2. So my midpoint would be at 310. Just finding midpoint given two endpoints is pretty straightforward, but sometimes they give you one endpoint and the midpoint and you're going to find the other endpoint. Well, if this is x1, y1, what I'm missing is the other endpoint, x2, y2. So I'm still going to use the same formula. So it's x1 plus x2 divided by 2, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. And what I'll know is that it equals this midpoint. Now I only have one, so I have negative 4 plus x2. I don't know what x2 is. And I have 8 plus y2. Let me take that off. And that's going to equal, again, I know my midpoint is 6, negative 12. This gives me 6. If I knew the other endpoint and plugged it in and divided it by 2, I would get 6. So those two go together. And then this gives me this. So if I were to plug in y2 and do the math, I would get negative 12. So now I can solve each of these little equations. Because, you know, I'm going to back up for just a second. Based on this, if I know the two endpoints, so I do 2 plus 4 divided by 2, that gave me 3. And then 6 plus 4 divided by 2 gave me 10. Or sorry, 6 plus 14 divided by 2. Well, I don't know the second point, but I do know what it'll equal. So to solve this, we're going to multiply by 2, and these 2's are going to cancel. So I'm going to have negative 4 plus, I'm sorry, I wrote that as x squared. It is not x squared, it's x sub 2. That's my fault, sorry about that. So x2 is equal to 12. So negative 4 plus x sub 2 equals 12. And to get rid of this negative 4, because it's negative, I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So x sub 2 is equal to 16. And I do the same thing to find y. I'm going to multiply by 2, because these 2's are going to cancel. And I'm going to get 8 plus y2 equals negative 24. This is a positive 8, so I'm going to subtract from both sides. And I'm going to get negative 24 and negative 8. Those are both negative, so I add them together. And it stays negative, negative 32. So my other endpoint is 16, negative 32. So, gosh, there's not enough room on there, is there? Okay, so I'm going to do C. So I'll just do it right here. So what I have is, I have my endpoint and I have my midpoint. That's M, this is the midpoint. So I know that 6 plus some x divided by 2, and then negative 3 plus some y divided by 2 is going to give me the 0.45. Because I've been given an endpoint and the midpoint. So I take each of these sections. So 6 plus x sub 2 over 2 equals 4. Because the x's go together. And then negative 3 plus y over 2 equals 5 because the y's go together. I'm always going to multiply by 2 because this is always going to be 2 in the denominator. So this gives me 6.
So you always just multiply the second x and y by 2?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Because what I'm doing is I'm canceling. This is divided by 2, so to undo divided by 2, I multiply by 2. So I get 6 plus x sub 2 equals 8. If this is positive, you subtract it. If it's negative, you add it. Because you always do the opposite. So x sub 2 is going to be 2 on this one. So when I do my endpoint, that's b. First my x is 2. Now I have to go find my y. So I'm going to multiply by 2 again, because those will cancel. And I get negative 3 plus y sub 2 is equal to 10. And this was a negative, so I'm going to add. So if it's positive, I subtract. If it's negative, I add. And I get 13. So that's my other coordinate. So my answer for this one would be 213. We've been given vertices of the sides of a triangle, L, M, and N, and we want to find the midpoints of each side. So I'm just going to draw some random triangle, L, M, and N, right? So one side is made up of LN, another side is LM, and the final side is NM. Do you see that? So these are the 3 groups of points that I'll have to use to find the midpoints between the points. Does that make sense? So if I start with LN, side LN is going to be, I have negative 3, 2, and 1, 3 that I need to find the midpoints for that. So I'm going to say midpoint, and it's going to be, again, I'm just going to put it here. x1 plus x2 over 2, y1 plus y2 over 2. So x1, negative 3, x2 is 1, divided by 2. y1 is 2, y2 is 3, divided by 2. Negative 3 plus 1 is 2. 2 plus 3 is 5. And that doesn't divide evenly, so I'm just going to leave it. So again, this was for the first side that I chose, which is LN.
So you do all 3?
And then the next side I'll do is LM. And this time I'll use these 2 points. So I have negative 3, negative 1, and 2 and 6. So that gives me negative 4 divided by 2 and 8 divided by 2, which gives me negative 2 and 4. And then the final side would be NM. So I'm going to use these 2 points. So I have -1 plus 1 divided by 2 and 6 plus 3 divided by 2. So I get 0 divided by 2 and 9 divided by 2. And again, 9 divided by 2 doesn't go, so I'm just going to leave it as a fraction. That's perfectly acceptable. You don't have to do the actual division. We'll find the midpoints of P and Q. So again, to know which to do, it says P and Q are the endpoints, find the midpoint. So then we just plug it in directly into the formula. So I have 6 plus 12 divided by 2 and -2 plus 4 divided by 2. So that's 18 divided by 2 and 2 divided by 2. So that's 9, 1. So this is the point halfway along the line connecting the other 2 points, right? Here I have -5 plus -1 divided by 2 and 2 plus 8 divided by 2. So I get -6 over 2 and 10 over 2. So -3 and 5. The biggest thing you want to be careful of is making sure that you put your x's together and your y's together. You don't mix x's and y's. We're going to talk about slope, and slope is a concept that for some reason a lot of people hate. Slope is just another way to talk about steepness. If you have a high number slope, you have a steep line. If you have a low number slope, you have a less, flatter line. If you're completely flat, if you have no slope at all, you're just completely flat, you're 0. It's represented by the letter M because another word for slope is magnitude. That's where the M comes from. So slope stands for slope, steepness, magnitude, represented by the letter M. Now there's more than one way to calculate slope. Okay, the distance you move up is called the rise, and the distance you move sideways is called the run. And slope is the rise over the run. Well, the distance you move up is how far you've changed in the y. So it can also be represented as delta y. And the distance you move sideways is delta x. Delta means change in. It's the Greek letter for, it's a Greek D actually, but delta means change in. And the formula for that is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So if you're given points, like you were given the coordinates for this point and the coordinates for this point, you subtract the y's, that goes on top, you subtract the x's, that goes on the bottom. Okay, so if I say this point is 5, 9 and this point is -4, -2, I can call this x1, x2, x1, y1, x2, y2, or vice versa. It doesn't matter which points I say is the first x1, y1, just so long as I don't say this is x1 and this is y2. They have to both be 1s or both be 2s. So I'm just going to say x1, y1, x2, y2, just for no particular reason. And I'm going to plug it into that formula that I just gave you. Oops, x2 over x1. So I'm going to say y1 was 9, and from 9 I'm going to subtract -2. x2 is 5, and from there I'm going to subtract -4. Minus a negative is the same thing as positive. So I'm going to 11 over 9. So my slope is 11 over 9.
both parentheses, they cancel each other out?
It's basically you're doing a -1 times a -2, and that gives you a +2. I like to do, like, see if I see that, I make a smiley face and he's happy and that's positive. Some people like to connect the dots and make a big giant plus. However it works for you. Just know that if you see this, 2 negatives, it's the same thing as a positive. Alright, so the slope-intercept form of a linear equation is y equals mx plus b. You see this all over the place. And what we have is y equals mx plus b. That m is still the slope. This b is the y-intercept, which is the place where it crosses the y-axis. So it's a line. Okay. Now, if we're given an equation of a line and we want to find the slope, what we do is we're going to take this equation and we want to make it look like y equals mx plus b. So we're going to take this and we're going to get it to be y, and then we're going to shove everything else on the other side. So we want y by itself and everything else to the other side. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this 2x, I'm going to move it over here. Now if I cross that equal sign, I have to change the sign. So if 2x is positive here, it's going to be negative over here. Okay, so I picked it up and I put it on the other side because I don't want it with the y, I want it away from the y. And I can do that. I can pick things up and I can move them to the other side. It's just if I do, I have to change their sign. It's like if you go from one team to another, you don't wear the same jersey, right? You change your jersey. So this is the same thing. The x is going from one team to another, so he was positive here, so he's negative here. Then the next thing I need to do is I need to get rid of this -4. So what I'm going to do is it's -4 times y, so I'm going to divide everything. Okay. So if I want to get rid of this -4, I have to divide everything by -4. And that'll leave me a y by itself. -2 over -4 is going to be +1/2. And +7 over -4, I can just leave it like that. I can leave it a fraction, I just don't leave the negative in the denominator. Once I've done this, and I have y equals mx plus b, I found my slope. My slope is 1/2. Alright. We have horizontal and vertical lines. Horizontal lines. This is horizontal. Flat. Horizontal lines are flat like the horizon. And the slope is 0. Okay, so if you have a flat line, you have no slope, 0 slope. Vertical lines go straight up and down, and the slope is undefined. And the reason the slope is undefined is because slope is the change in y over the change in x. Well, x is not changing because I'm straight up and down, so I'm not moving right or left at all. So I'd be dividing by 0, and we can't divide by 0. So that's why it's undefined. And so if this was, say, 1, 2, 3, 4, like that, this line would be x equals 2. And if I come over here and I have 1, 2, 3, this is y equals 3. So a horizontal line, you just go along the y-axis and find the number where it hits, and it's y equals that number. Vertical lines, you go over and you find the number where it hits, and it's x equals that number. But here again is the slope formula, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. We can label these, and it doesn't matter which point is 1s and which point is 2s, just so long as they're both 1s and both 2s, not a 1 and a 2 together. So I can say -9 minus -1, 7 minus 5, and that negative is positive. So this is -9 plus 1 over 2. -9 plus 1 is -8 over 2. So my slope will be -4. So m equals -4. Midpoint situation. What I have is, this is my m. So I call this x1, y1, x2, y2. And what I get is -3 is equal to -11 minus -2 over x minus 1. So that gives me -3 is equal to a -11 plus 2 over x minus 1. So I get -3 is equal to -9 over x minus 1. Now, when you have a variable in the denominator and you've got this equal to a single number, there's a trick, and the trick is you can take these two things and they can trade places. And you get x minus 1 is equal to -9 over -3. Now the reason you can do this, because I'm going to show you kind of over here why this works. If I have -3 is equal to -9 over x minus 1, to clear that in the denominator, I multiply both sides by x minus 1. So those will cancel. And so what I get is -3 times x minus 1 is equal to -9. -3 times, I can divide this by -3 to cancel that. And so I get x minus 1 is equal to -9 divided by -3. So I traded places. So if you know that trick, you don't have to do all this work. You can just trade places. Does that make sense? So now -9 divided by -3, oops, is 3. So I add 1 to both sides, and x equals 4. So that missing x was 4. So it's y equals mx plus b. And slope is m, so my slope is 2. For b, I'm going to have to do some work. I need to take this and I need to turn it into the y equals mx plus b. So again, I'm going to just pick this guy up and I'm going to move him over. And he was positive, so now he's negative. I'm going to divide everything by that number on the y, whatever it is. And now I have my slope. Okay. To find my slope with my points, I'm going to write the formula again up here. So I've got my formula. So I just label these 1s and 2s. So I have y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So I have 12 minus -5, that's 12 plus 5 over 3. So this is 17 over 3. And I can leave it just like that. Okay, I have -13 minus -3 over 15 minus 15. So this gives me -13 plus 3, so that's -10 over 0. When that happens, my answer is undefined. I cannot have 0 in the denominator. That's not allowed. So my slope is undefined.